Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response, Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight Protocol, presented by our sponsor, Heffernan. We're so happy you can join us. My name is Amanda Ramatar, and I will be your moderator today, and I will also be monitoring questions you may have during the session. Before we open up the session, let's review a couple of key items. All of the webinar materials we discuss can be found at the URL currently showing on your screen. I will be sharing this URL in a follow-up email, so don't feel like you need to write it down right now. If you have trouble with your internet connection during the webinar, we recommend leaving the presentation and logging back in. We do not control the audio, your devices control the audio, so if you have audio difficulties, try adjusting the volume settings on your device. If a telephone line goes dead during the call, hang up and call back again to the same number. If all lines go dead, watch the on-screen chat box for an alternative call-in number. Feel free to ask questions or provide feedback by using the chat box or questions box during the webinar. If you are using a tablet, you may need to tap on the screen for the options bar to appear. Then you can select the appropriate option. We may not respond immediately, but we will work your questions or feedback into the presentation. If we can't get to your comment or question during the session, we will be online afterwards to respond, or we may follow up in an email if we run completely out of time. You may also email us at moderator@aspenrmg.com for up to 48 hours after the webinar. This will be a 1-hour presentation. Questions and comments are very much encouraged throughout, and the presenters will be answering questions at the end. And lastly, we have a number of upcoming webinars covering a variety of topics, including those listed at the Heffernan webinar website. In addition, we are offering the mandatory Preventing Harassment training in English on June 20th this year. With that, let's begin today's webinar, Active Shooter Armed Assailant Response, Training for the DHS Run, Hide, Fight Protocol. Our presenter today is Dr. Steve Albrecht. Dr. Albrecht is a trainer, author, and consultant specializing in complex HR issues and security concerns. He holds a doctorate in business administration, an MA in security management, a BS in psychology, and a BA in English. He is board certified in HR security management, employee coaching, and threat management. He has written 24 books on business service leadership, security, and criminal justice subjects. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Albrecht.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. Good to be with you, everybody, and happy to share my information with you here. Amanda, how are we looking on the screen there? Good?
Looks perfect.
Great. Thanks to the good folks at Aspen Risk Management Group, who I have been friends with for probably 20 years, and also for the nice people at Heffernan for sponsoring our program today. Amanda, I think we have some polling questions to get us started, just to get a sense of how people see this particular subject of violence prevention.
Sounds good. Let me launch the first one for you. My company or agency has a workplace violence prevention plan. And so we typically like to get about 70% of our audience to participate in each of the questions. No one's being graded, so don't worry. It's just so we can get a gauge for how everybody is doing. So we got about 50% right now. Awesome. So we're at 70%, so I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question and read the results. We have 44% who said yes, 38% who said no, and 17% said don't know.
Okay.
And our next question. My company or agency has shown some version of the Run, Hide, Fight video to employees as part of a training program or staff meeting. All right, so we're getting close to 70%. Awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question and share the results with everybody. We have 32% who said yes, 55% who said no, and 13% said don't know.
Okay.
All right, last question. Does your company or agency have a threat assessment, emergency response, critical incident, or crisis management team? Okay, we've got 70%. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And share, 47% said yes, 45% said no, and 8% said don't know.
Okay, thanks a lot, Amanda, for that. Let's talk about these for just a couple of seconds before I roll into the presentation. The reason for the questions is to kind of see where we are in terms of the length and maturity of this subject is kind of parallels sexual or racial harassment. We have policies, we have a response protocol for people who have been targeted, we have an investigative process, and we have consequences for perpetrators. That has been built into the sexual racial harassment prevention approach by most human resources agencies for a very long time. We're looking for the same type of response for this issue, workplace violence. It has become, unfortunately, in this country, a mature issue, a mature subject, meaning it's been around for a while. I have been working in this arena since 1992, so that makes over 30 years of this concept and issue and problem for us, for me as a security and human resources consultant, and for somebody who has been involved in this issue for a long time. I'm always encouraging organizations to develop a policy which could get they could get from another organization or from their human resources professionals who may be able to copy or borrow from existing policies. What we're looking for in the policy approach is a kind of a prohibition on weapons in the workplace, a response to people who have been victimized by workplace violence, whether it's taxpayers, customers, visitors, vendors, or other employees, and consequences for perpetrators, including a law enforcement response and a security response. The second piece we'll talk about here as well, which is the Run, Hide, Fight video. There are many out on the market, all free to see on YouTube. The most common is one we'll talk about, which is the Department of Homeland Security and City of Houston, Texas version called Run, Hide, Fight. I have an actual better one, which I think is far superior in terms of not frightening people, but still giving an empowering conversation about the issue. It's done by the California State University system. So even if you're not in California, it still works. Cal State University system has created a Run, Hide, Fight video, which is animated. I think not only does it work for employees and students, but it might work for you at home, for your kids in terms of talking about this issue, maybe 14 or 15 years old and above. And the last one is really a movement towards crisis management teams, a movement towards threat assessment teams or critical incident response teams. These don't have to be really formalized where you know it's more complicated than it sounds. What we're looking to do is bring together, whether you're in public or private sector, people inside your organization who we would define as the safety and security stakeholders. And these people would have a human resources function, a security function, or a law enforcement function if it's public sector, obviously. They would have a legal function. It's your corporate attorney or city attorney or county counsel. It would be your risk management professionals, your public information or corporate communications professionals, and somebody from IT and somebody from facilities as a manager or director who would come together on an as-needed basis in these safety and security stakeholder conversations about threats that involve outside people, whether it's taxpayers, strangers, customers, visitors, vendors, people we provide services to, or it's internal, it's employee bullying, it's current employees, it's ex-employees, or the kind of growing, but unfortunately kind of a shadow issue, which is domestic violence involving an employee. I was a DV investigator for the PD in San Diego for 6 years. I handled 1,500 cases in that time span. Most domestic violence victims work. So you can expect that the more female employees that you have, the more likelihood you have of this. We have same-sex sexual orientation and male victims occasionally, but mostly it's a female victim, male perpetrator problem in our country. One of the good news pieces about this subject, at least in California, is we have something called Senate Bill 400. Senate Bill 400 requires management to create a safety plan for an employee who brings a domestic violence situation to their attention. And the second is, in California at least, other states don't have this, but California does, that makes domestic violence victimhood a protected class, meaning they cannot be fired for bringing that to the attention of management. So it's two issues. One is protected class, and second is the need and requirement for a safety plan with the employee, which can include moving him or her to a safer location, a different location inside the building, off the property completely. So there are some possibilities that we'll talk about. So again, thanks to Amanda and the good folks at Heffernan and Aspen. Let me tell you about how I got into this subject briefly. In 1994, I co-wrote a book called Ticking Bombs with a guy named Michael Mantell. Mantell was the police psychologist in San Diego. He was also Oprah's Dr. Phil before there was a Dr. Phil. So he got our book on Oprah, which was cool for us back in the day. The Ticking Bombs book featured my interview with a workplace violence murderer, a guy that killed 2 people. I went to the prison where he was housed in California and asked him why. And the driver for his conversation with me became the kind of the central chapter of the book way back in 1994 when the book came out. I interviewed him in 93, and again, I interviewed him in 2013, 20 years later, afterwards to see what he had learned being in prison, and the answer was not much. He recently passed away when he was let out of prison in California last year. His name was Robert Mack. Robert Mack killed 2 people at the General Dynamics where he worked in San Diego. He was fired during an attendance hearing, a union meeting that was to talk about his termination. So our book back in those days, and if you're old enough to recall back in the 90s, the workplace violence issue was really centered around the concept of the post office. The idea of going postal was a phrase that we had in our world back then. And we have not seen that in our world, thankfully, mostly because they've changed the work environment in the post office. They've changed the sense of management, oversight, and punishment, and union issues and things like that that came from a kind of a heavy-handed management approach. And so to their credit, they have not had that issue anymore in the post office. It certainly happened in lots of other places in our country, unfortunately. But one of the things that it speaks to, the driver of the change in approach to how we supervise people at the post office, and the Postmaster General wrote the foreword for our book back in '94, is how we treat people. And the biggest driver, in my experience, of the 3 workplace violence murderers I have interviewed in prison, Robert Mack, a guy named Scott the Cry, and another guy named Larry Hansel, all killed multiple people in the workplace. The driver for that, and the driver for the cases I've seen in this country in the last 20 years, and unfortunately even recently, is revenge. The desire for revenge is a driver for why these people do these things. It doesn't make sense to us, but it makes sense to them. They need to pay somebody back for getting fired, for getting denied services, for getting kicked out, for somebody broke their heart. These situations oftentimes drive these workplace violence, school violence situations that we've seen certainly in the last 5 years pretty dramatically, including our schools, hospitals, malls, churches, public spaces, concerts, things like that. So I wrote, of my 26 books that I've written a book on crisis management, which is the corporate self-defense book. I wrote a workplace violence textbook called Fear and Violence on the Job, a book which you can get on Amazon now called Stay Safe at Work. And that's all about kind of a workplace security guide, a general one for each employee to fill out and add to things that are specific to their particular location. So I had been working in this arena for a long time. I have a lot to say about it. My knowledge comes from the training I have received from the FBI and the Secret Service and the U.S. Marshals. It comes from my belonging to a group called ATAP, which you can see online, ATAP, A-T-A-P. That stands for the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals. And atapworldwide.org is where we are. We have probably 15 chapters around the United States, including Canada, Australia, Asia, and Europe. And we focus in ATAP, and we've been doing this for almost 30 years now, on threat assessment, on managing the risk of violence in schools, and with the workplace, domestic violence, and stalking and terrorism type cases as well. So my knowledge comes from being around these professionals, which are multi-jurisdictional, and kind of how you would think of a threat assessment team process in your own organization. It's legal, it's HR, it's security, it's law enforcement, it's corporate communications or public information officer, it's IT, it's facilities. These same types of people belong to ATAP as well, because we have discovered that the solution, at least in the prevention stages and the response stages for these types of cases, whether it's a threat from an outside person or an employee or an ex-employee, is best handled as a team approach. So I want you to think about, in your organization, if you're in a leadership role, what is the movement that you can make towards bringing together on an ad hoc, as necessary basis, those people into your organization that can provide insight in their respective areas. IT is a big part of this because of cyber threats. Facilities is a big part of this because of access control and increasing our security posture and our access control in our organizations. Human resources, certainly because they are the driver of the HR functions and the labor of people in our organizations. And these cases and crimes are done by employees sometimes and ex-employees other times. And certainly corporate communications, certainly the CEO or the senior leader in the organization will have insight. And legal is the one that keeps the documentation and looks at the labor law issues and some of the other concerns we have about discipline, termination, things like that. So I want you to think about from your perspective how you can organize, contribute to, create, staff, encourage that type of team approach to workplace violence prevention in your organization, and as best as you can get a copy of a workplace violence policy that you like from another source or from internal sources, and start to craft that around what your organization wants to look like for this issue. Again, we see this as rare, but it happens. It's like sexual harassment in terms of the need for consequences, the need for a investigative protocol, the need for support for victims, including mental health support and time off, and also a security posture, which is built into the HR part about definitely defining which kinds of employee behaviors are not allowed, possession of weapons, things like that. So let's start kind of in the backwards on this issue and look at workplace violence from an active shooter perspective. We've seen these cases that happen in elementary schools, K through 12 schools, colleges and universities. Most recently at the private school in Tennessee. There was a shooting last month at Michigan State University at the campus there in Detroit. We've seen cases all around the country in Texas and Florida, and certainly in California where I used to be. When we look at these perpetrators, again, the driver for their reason for doing these things, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is the revenge. And so how we treat people in the customer-client relationship, how we treat people in the vendor relationship, how we treat people as current or former employees is really significant in terms of being a inhibitor or disinhibitor for violence. So when we look at active shooters, some people think that these people are invincible because they wear camouflage and they have long rifles and assault weapons, and they have night vision goggles and things like that. Well, I can wear a cowboy hat, doesn't make me a cowboy. These people are not invincible. They're not unstoppable. They're not commandos. These aren't Navy SEALs gone bad. These are just goofy people that live in their parents' basement and have access to guns. That doesn't mean they're not dangerous, but what it does mean that we can stop them in a variety of ways, which we'll talk about. Second, most people don't understand the concept of the active shooter as knowing that there is a ticking clock in this person's head. I'll say male mostly because they're mostly male perpetrators. We've had females, but mostly male perpetrators, the lone wolf, so to speak. That person knows that he has 5 minutes or 10 minutes to kill as many people as possible until the police arrive. Every cop in the country has been trained. I've trained a lot of them myself in my career to the active shooter model, which is get as many people safely and effectively and carefully out of the building as possible. And for those that cannot leave the building, that they lock down or shelter in place. They stay out of the way of the bad guy and they stay out of the way of the responding police. And so the cops know they have to get there as soon as possible and engage. And we've seen this many times successfully and sometimes, unfortunately, unsuccessfully, the law enforcement response. So these perpetrators know that. And that's why they don't stop and try to pick locks or shoot out the door locks or things like that. They just move on to the next open space they can find. If we skip down to number 4, I'll come back to 3. Many of these perpetrators have a target list. This could be ex-girlfriend, ex-wife. It could be new boyfriend of somebody that's dating their ex-wife or ex-girlfriend. This happens in the workplace as well. It could be boss. It could be human resources. It could be supervisor they believe bullied them. In the K through 12 environment, it could be teachers, it could be coaches, it could be counselors, it could be other students. In the healthcare environment, it's doctors. We've seen this, which is disturbing. They're shooting medical providers in healthcare facilities. Some of you may have seen in your own hometowns difficult and challenging the ER is to keep safe and secure in most cities in the United States. So they have a target list and they go after specific people that they want to harm. And this goes back to a larger picture, which is how we treat people makes a difference. As one of my clinician friends say, hurt people, meaning people who have been harmed, at least from their perspective, feel like they can harm other people and not feel badly about it. Third one, most people believe that the cops will be able to see these people based on what they're wearing or what they're carrying. That may or may not be true. Some of these perpetrators are smart enough to hide out. They've hid out inside schools. Sometimes they get away. Oftentimes they just wait to shoot it out with the police or commit suicide. But your response, in the rare possibility one of these things happens, is that you tell the cops what this person looks like. You tell the dispatchers what this person looks like, what they're wearing, what they're carrying, how they're dressed, what direction they're going, things like that. 5, and this is a personal choice issue, an alarming number of people believe that lying on the floor and pretending to be dead will save them from being killed. I disagree completely, not only from my research, but in my life, having worked in law enforcement for almost 16 years. I will never give up the will to fight. I will never be in a situation where someone has the upper hand on me. I will always fight back because I know who these people are. They're not commandos. They're not warriors. These aren't military people gone rogue. They're goofballs, and we can stop them. These are dangerous people, but that doesn't make them unstoppable. And so my perspective is get out as fast as possible. If that's not possible, then shelter in place. And then the third choice is to fight back. They're coming into a locked room, which they have to get past the doors and whatever we put in front to barricade the doors, and come into outside a dark room that you know better than they do. We have the upper hand tactically. That includes using heavy objects or fire extinguishers or things like that to fight back with, to save yourself and other people. Many people believe that the shooter will not fire through wooden doors or tinted glass. This is the difference between cover versus concealment. Cover stops bullets. Concealment hides you. Concealment is tinted glass or tinted windows or curtains or blinds or shades or wooden doors or drywall. Cover is concrete, steel, metal, doorways, things that are steel reinforced, concrete bollards, things in front of a building, stuff like that. These perpetrators don't typically shoot through the locks to come inside, or they have never impersonated the police by knocking on the door. Doesn't mean it won't happen. 7, many people believe that while engaging with the shooter and clearing the building, the police will have the time and the capability to provide them first aid. They will not. One of the biggest problems we see in our world around this issue is the first responders cannot stop to provide care. That means the police cannot stop to provide first aid, and they must search the buildings, many offices or classrooms or hospital rooms, whatever it happens to be, before they can get the medical responders, firefighters, and paramedics into these areas, and that takes time. So one of the things I have always told my clients, and something for you to think about is, especially if you're in a facilities function, is to look at your first aid kits and put way, way, way more tourniquets into those first aid kits. You may have AED machines in your facility, you may have first aid kits. You need more bandages, more tourniquets, and you can get those from Amazon for really cheap. I have a bunch. I have them in my gear bag and in my gym bag and in my car and a bunch of other places. I can put it on myself, or I can put it on somebody else very quickly. The other thing about first aid and first responders coming in is sometimes we make it difficult for them because we have such good access control they can't get in. And this only struck me a few years ago, and I don't know why it took so long. But when we look at access control, it's really, really important that we give our key cards to our first responders. And if you know what a Knox box is, that is something that is mounted outside of your facility. It's used by the firefighters to get inside the building without breaking down the doors. They have keys to the Knox box, which gets them inside your facility. We also need to put your access control key cards into the Knox boxes, not just hard keys as well. 8, many people think that gunshot sounds like firecrackers or a car backfiring instead of a gun. That's wrong. That's a denial kind of a statement that they go, well, it must be car backfiring or firecrackers. We don't have firecrackers in May in an office. The only time you should hear firecrackers is on 4th of July or that weekend. Sometimes we rationalize irrational behavior. If it sounds dangerous, make sure that you are moving towards safety before you figure out, that it's not dangerous. At that time that you spend moving to safety is very important. 9, the cops are going to respond in all kinds of plainclothes and tactical gear and different color uniforms. In many states, the sheriffs wear one color of uniform and PD wears another. Federal agents wear blue for customs and green for border patrol. There's a lot of khaki. There's a lot of green pants for sheriffs, things like that. Plainclothes investigators may be wearing baseball caps and SWAT gear. Plainclothes investigators could wear a suit and a tie. We typically see an over response to the police to these situations. They'll come, maybe 200 or 300 cops will come to one of these events because they want to get there and help, and also they just want to see what's going on. So that's a concept called mutual aid, which says even if you have a small agency in your particular community, they're going to come from everywhere. It could be railroad cops, college police, all kinds of folks are coming, and you need to brief staff and say the police response is going to be varied and chaotic, but recognize that there are cops that aren't going to look necessarily like cops in uniform. They may be wearing some other kinds of things, other kinds of gear. 10, we talked about 11, the first responder key cards. 10, the real value to me in surviving these events, and not only from the catastrophic part, but from the mental health part, is having post-traumatic stress resources available, which could be your employee assistance program or EAP. It could be a relationship you have with the local Red Cross. It could be a relationship you have with your local fire department or PD that may be able to provide psychological services to you. It could be chaplains. It could be clergy in your community. It could be some of these volunteer community trauma professionals that have been trained volunteers to come to these situations. Whatever it is, the PTSD part is real, and we need to have a response in the rare possibility that this happens in your organization as well. So we go to trainings like this to change your behavior under stress. I don't try not to stress people out during the training. No bloody videos or scary photos or anything like that. You can see the cases if you look, you know, in the last 2 months in this country, last 3 months in this country, you can see a number of horrific workplace violence, school violence, healthcare violence, public violence cases. What we want to do is get people to do the right thing under stress, which is to leave the facility as safely and quickly as possible, to hide out inside the facility or shelter in place in the safest lockable place possible. And then the third one is fight back. Under stress, we go back to how we have been trained. And if you've not thought about this issue, sometimes under stress, people freeze. Sometimes in the old days, we had a 911 versus 911 issue, meaning sometimes you had to dial 9 to get an outside line. That's not always possible these days, but sometimes we still see phone systems where that is. The other part, if you look at that about fifth point there, fourth, fifth point, is in your community, as in my community, if you dial 911 on your cell phone, typically the Highway Patrol, the state police answer. I came from California, the California Highway Patrol. I live in Missouri, the Missouri State Police answer 911 calls, and then they have to transfer you over to the representative fire, emergency medical services, or PD or sheriff in your community. So I always tell people, if you have a choice between landline, which is a hardline phone in your office, and I'm not sure whether VoIP, voice over internet protocol phones match this characteristic. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Or a cell phone. If it's safer to use your cell phone, certainly do that. But if it's not, it doesn't make a difference, and you have access to the phone line, use the landline phone. It's faster. It goes to the representative sheriff's or PD or EMS fire location that's closest to you, dispatch center, and also if the phone lines are trunked correctly, they'll know your address of where you're calling from. I also tell people in workplace violence possibilities, if you have to leave the building and you're in a multi-story building, how would you get out if the perpetrator was above you, where you would go out quickly below? If the perpetrator was below you, you would try to go to a higher floor or stay where you are and not move down into danger area. And the other thing for people is sometimes they'll work in an office and they'll be on the ground floor and they say, well, I'm stuck here, I'm trapped. And I go, no, you're not. Break a window. Well, with what? Well, with your chair or with, your laptop or something. Break a window and climb out the window if it's big enough to do so. Some people think, well, why would I do that? I have to go out the door. Now, think about in emergencies, the possibility of going out through a window. So a couple themes for this discussion. One is these events, sadly, went away from what we used to see prior to Columbine, which happened in April of 99, which is these perpetrators would take hostages and demand a helicopter and $1 million cash and a plane ticket to some country, and that's not what we have now. These aren't negotiations, these aren't hostages, these are murder situations. We want to get people out as fast and as effectively and as safely as possible, or have them shelter in place to a spot, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, where the perpetrator cannot get in. The short window of time, 5 to 10 minutes, is where we need to do our best movements away from danger, either leaving the facility completely, including getting in your car and driving away, or sheltering in place. The police response is going to be lots of cops with different uniforms. I've talked about the value of tourniquets. Jot this phrase down, or this website. It is stopthebleed.org or what is called bleedingcontrol.org. Both of those websites are kind of the same. Bleedingcontrol.org and stopthebleed.org is a driver to a centralized website that takes you to a tourniquet training program that's put on by your local healthcare professionals. It's typically 90 minutes. I did it when I was living in Colorado. It's not scary. It's not blood everywhere, but it is sort of necessary for us to understand how tourniquets work. where you put them on, 2 inches above the wound and not around people's necks, and you leave them on until the paramedics take the person away, et cetera. That kind of training can be very empowering for some types of people who want a better knowledge about this. So take a look at bleedingcontrol.org or stopthebleed.org. Interestingly, where those websites came from was something called the Hartford Protocol. The Hartford Protocol came after Sandy Hook, Connecticut had the school shootings at Sandy Hook, where the first responders, the paramedics, the surgeons, the trauma surgeons got together and said, we are losing too many kids and people from bleeding to death. We need a better protocol in this country for tourniquets. And that's where that program came from. It's now national. Train and discuss with staff to be able to give as much information to the dispatchers as possible. The good news is the dispatchers talk to the cops as they arrive. They talk to them by mobile data terminal. They talk to them over the radio all the way up to when they arrive at the event. Suspect descriptions, what this person's wearing, carrying, moving towards, where they are, et cetera, very important. Again, these perpetrators are not Navy SEALs gone bad. They're not Marine commandos. They're just dipsticks with guns, and that doesn't make them easy to deal with, but it doesn't make them superheroes as well. And that will to survive is very powerful when you think about who you want to go home and see after one of these rare possibilities of these events. So a couple things from a management perspective. Staff may have fears about the people we deal with. It could be an environment where we get a lot of the public coming in, they're angry. If you're in a compliance business, if you collect money, if you have an after hours, late night type of business, there's different fears than if you work in like in a real estate office, right? Real estate office may have a different concerns out in the field, certainly. But when you look at the type of business you have, what is our primary concern by staff? And I do a lot of work in public government. I work a lot in libraries. I work a lot in the city halls and county buildings where the staff is concerned, especially during tax time, during times where the taxpayers and citizens come in quite angry. I work a lot with healthcare, same thing. People go into healthcare quite under stress and angry, and staff has to deal with them, especially at the administrative or clerical or reception level before they get to where the caregivers are. Do we have special needs people in our organizations who are employees? Could be elderly in terms of movement issues or disabled. Do we have kids that are coming into our facilities? Do we have people with special needs, cognitive issues, disabilities, things like that it could be difficult to evacuate quickly? Do we have a plan for that? How do we get them out using chairs, rolling chairs, carrying them, things like that? Have we talked about the intensity of the police response? We have. And then my perfect world, and I always ask for this. It's hard sometimes to get everybody to comply because sometimes management doesn't like to scare people, which bothers me because it's not about scaring, it's about preparation and prevention and awareness, is to schedule a drill once a year of just run, hide. Not the fight part, but just say, we're going to do a drill. It's going to last for 15 minutes before we open for business today. We're going to do it with everybody where you either have two choices: leave the building safely, quickly, don't fall down. 15 minutes away from the building, come back to work, pick up your pens, get back to the keyboard, there you go. Or hide out inside the safest room, barricadable room in this building. Break room, restroom, locker room, conference room, training room, supervisor's room, someplace we store the file folders, the mops, some room that we do administrative hearings in or something like that, that we can put as many people in, break room, and lock it down. And do that for 15 minutes and then back to work. All we're trying to do is imprint with people the possibility, as rare as it is for the rest of their career, that this could happen. And then the last one is, what are our mental health resources, whether it's employee assistance program, whether it's through our medical benefits plan, whether it's something that our organization has a relationship with clinical providers in our community. It could be county mental health, it could be Red Cross volunteers, it could be clergy that can come in and help us with the post-traumatic stress response to one of these situations. Right after the Las Vegas shooting, mass shooting, killed 57 people back several years ago, I talked to a lot of people who were at that concert, a lot of people who survived that concert, some including people who were wounded. And we all talked about the value and the strength and the success they had in getting back to, quote, normal life, which is hard to do after that event, of having gone through therapy and having gone through counseling and having gone through post-traumatic stress counseling, which I have done as well for my police career. And I think it's valuable. So let's kind of go back to Workplace Violence 101. These are the OSHA types that OSHA has categorized starting back in the 90s for workplace violence. Category 1 is typically robbery, is the most common, that's criminals. Category 2 is people we provide services to. The reasons, again, revenge, anger, mental illness, desire for self-protection if they feel harmed or harmed by an organization, whether it's public or private. Third one, current or former employees, typically revenge. It could be a domestic violence issue, but it's typically you fired me or suspended me or didn't promote me or somebody bullied me. And then the fourth one, if I can't have you, nobody else can. Those guys are super dangerous. That is domestic violence. And the biggest issue with domestic violence in the workplace is it's oftentimes unreported because the employee is fearful of being fired. And that's a problem. What we should say to employees is, look, we don't have no interest in prying into your personal life, but you have to tell us that this person that you have a restraining order from could come to work. We need to address it. We have a duty to keep you safe, an OSHA duty, as well as keeping everybody else safe. We're not going to fire you when you bring this to our attention. We want to help you. We have to create a plan for you. We want to create a plan for you, but you got to tell us these things are happening. And if, this is just my personal opinion, there was a fifth workplace violence category, I would say it's cyber. I'm concerned a lot as I look around the landscape of hacking and cyber attacks against our electrical grids and our water supply and our schools and our healthcare. I've seen a lot of healthcare networks overtaken by these perpetrators from other countries, and it's a concern to me. So if I had to guess, and I've been looking at this subject since '92, if I had to guess on the fifth workplace violence category to emerge, at least from the government's perspective in terms of measurement, I bet it's going to be cyber. I just wrote a big piece for this computer magazine about cybercrime and how it affects these ransomware programs where these companies and public and private sector get their payroll and their healthcare information management systems overtaken by these perpetrators to be paid a ransom. I think it's a big issue. So I mentioned that I work as a longtime member of ATAP, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, and this is our working model for how we perceive workplace violence, school violence perpetrators. This model has been put together by a guy named Ted Calhoun, who was a historian for the U.S. Marshals, and by a guy named Steve Weston. Weston was the commander in charge of the California Highway Patrol's Executive Protection Detail during the Arnold Schwarzenegger governor days. And what they talked about, and we use this as kind of a overarching thematic model for school violence and workplace violence and healthcare violence, domestic violence in this country, is these steps. And it doesn't always go this way, but a lot of it does. And if we do an overlay, there's usually the first two steps here. There's some sort of grievance the person has against another person or against the organization or both. It's a grievance against their doctor, their boss. It's a grievance against their ex-girlfriend. It's a grievance against their football coach, the principal. There's a violent ideation that they have, and everybody has these for a fraction of a second when somebody cuts you off on the highway, but it goes away, right? And you go back to your normal life. For these people, it does not. They reach a crossroads, a decision point, and that violent ideation turns into a plan. They skip past the decision point into research and planning, pre-attack preparation, surveillance, rehearsal fantasies, commando fantasies, and then they make the attack. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see there's certain things, and we've talked about some of them already, escalate or de-escalate people. De-escalation would be treatment, fair and firm and appropriate empathic treatment of people. De-escalation would be physical security devices. I know banks get robbed. Cameras aren't perfect, but they're a good deterrent. Access control is a significant de-escalation tool for workplace violence prevention because people can't get back to harm our folks if they're behind locked doors. Escalators are things like sometimes restraining orders escalate people. Sometimes a threat assessment intervention where the person believes that their time is running out and that they're going to move the target away from them, especially in domestic violence situations. Not much security, poor treatment of people during the HR process, especially during discipline and termination, could be escalators. So when you look at things that prevent violence, they're not all perfect, but they build a strong barrier to violence by at least diverting this person off this path, and this is what we call it, the path from ideas to actions. So I think about the list of de-escalators that you want to make, and also the escalators really focus on, my belief anyway, about treatment, how we treat people in terms of being firm and fair and empathic and reasonable and appropriate and patient with them as they go through whatever life issues or traumas or disturbances they have, so that we don't get on their list, their targeted list. And that's how these things happen in terms of this revenge piece. So I do a lot of media, and the media oftentimes wants to know a lot about motive, and the motive is not the part that I care about. It's not that I don't care about motive from the standpoint of being interested as to why these perpetrators do these things, but I can't fix motive, and I hope you understand that. If motive is broken heart, or motive is irrational religious beliefs, or motive is terrorism, or motive is extreme, undiagnosed, untreated mental illness, I can't fix motive. but I can't interrupt the opportunity. Access control, cameras, locks, key cards, employee vigilance, management vigilance, how we treat people, all these things can be disinhibitors. I can't fix motive. News media always wants to know about motive. But look at these things in red, the big D's, right? Disconnected from society. This person feels disaffected. We have a lot of young males that are this way in our culture now. They feel depressed. And depression is dangerous, usually to themselves, but it can be dangerous to other people as well, especially when they don't have hope. They're driven to act, desire for revenge, desperate, dangerous. We see early psychopathy in this group, meaning it's usually diagnosed after age 18, but we see it younger in junior high and high school kids. That narcissistic entitlement is the world revolves around me, especially when I have a gun, especially when I dress like a commando. Everybody's going to be afraid of me. That's narcissistically entitled. But they're depressed. And sometimes they're suicidally depressed, and then they're also homicidally depressed, which is where the photograph up top comes from, which is called the broken bridge of self-esteem. The broken bridge of self-esteem says, I literally don't care about my own life, whether I live or die, and I don't care about anybody else's life, live or die. That's how people can shoot little kids and coworkers and their ex-girlfriend. They don't care. And then no empathy or regard for self or others. That's really hard to fix if that exists, where this person does not care about another human being's life or their own. And look at this quote by one of these guys. I want to outdo my idols. And they do idolize these people. There are fan sites, sadly, for some of these perpetrators, including the Columbine perpetrators. I want international attention, and we give it to them. Within 10 minutes of the media discovers who these people are in these horrific cases, they put their face and sometimes their manifesto and their writings around the planet, right, on social media and on CNN and Fox and everywhere else. I want to be infamous, right? Lady Gaga's famous, right? I want to be infamous, even for a bad thing, and you can only kill me once, my actions will live on. So these perpetrators know that every year they're going to be a memorial for what they did for the survivors and the people who were killed. And that just reminds everybody that this event took place, and that's what they want, even when they're dead, which is really odd, strange logic, right? And so when I look at these people, we manufacture a lot of these in our culture. It's not so much about guns and mental health. It's a lot about everything, guns and mental health and this sense of hopelessness and helplessness, where these people are both troubled, right? Something's bothering them, and troubling, meaning they bother people. And then that element that gets thrown in, which is the desire for revenge, makes that concoction, these people can be dangerous. I've lived a depressed, disconnected, disaffected life with no real job, girlfriend, supportive family structure or goals. Because of this, I hate people and they seem to dislike me. I've collected the many injustices directed me my whole life, and now I'll kill as many people as I can for my revenge. I'll dress like a commando and I'll mimic my idols who have killed before me so that people will remember me and talk about my actions for decades. Not good so far, right? I'll post my words, photos, or videos of my discontent online to provide proof of either my irrational life views, religious zealotry, racial hatred, my active and untreated mental illness, and my rage against the world. I know the US and international press and instant social media, Facebook and everybody, Twitter, will expose me around the globe minutes after I'm dead or in jail, because that's what they do. This is a pretty accurate manifesto, right? This is how these people think. And the reason I know that is I wrote it, right? One night I had some adult beverages and I said, I'm going to write like one of these people that do these things. And this is the language they use. This is the approach they take. This is their rationalization. These are the excuses they make for their behavior. But it seems pretty close to what you may have seen on their Facebook postings, things that have been released to the media. This kind of is their approach. And I think I nailed it pretty good. So when we look at coworkers, when we look at clients or customers or people around us in our circle, do we see these behaviors? And again, they're not profiles. We're not profiling people, right? We're looking at behaviors. Is this person troubled, meaning something is bothering them? Are they troubling, meaning they bother people? Do we see signs of anger or anger turned inward, which is depression? And again, depressed people are dangerous without treatment, without cognitive behavioral therapy, without medication. They can be dangerous to others and themselves. Do we see religious zealotry or connection to terror groups? And the biggest one, there's really two up here that concern me the most. One is the injustice collector. Their favorite phrase is, it's not fair. Life is out to screw me. They're hypersensitive to being slighted. They have what's called a brittle personality, meaning that they're really hard to get along with, and they're paranoid and suspicious of everybody. These people can be really difficult to deal with, and I've done a lot of threat assessment work with them, because sometimes what we do, they've already predicted. I bet you're going to try to fire me, and we do. I bet you're going to call the police, and we do. And so what's already been predicted by them turns out to be true. It just reinforces their paranoia. Sometimes we see substance abuse, and not typically alcohol and stimulant drugs, but also mismanaging things like Adderall and mismanaging things like psychotropic medications for anxiety or depression, where they're taking too much or they're going on and off of them, or they're not managing the cycles effectively and they're in withdrawal, which makes their behavior super erratic. Were they bullied is much more likely of acting out as opposed to being a bully. Off the job or significant life issues, domestic violence, divorce, parenting problems, financial problems, legal problems where they feel no hope and they feel the only way that they can lash out or be seen or heard by anybody is with a gun. Acquired to practice with a firearm is not a huge risk factor for me unless it's out of character. Person says I'm going shooting this weekend, and you go, you know, okay, whatever. Or the person says I bought a gun, and you go, how come? And they go, you'll find out on Monday. That's a thing of concern for us. That needs to be reported. And then the other risk factor besides the injustice collector up there that concerns me the most is talks of using violence or workplace or school violence cases if it were a good thing. This person says, yeah, that kid that shot up the school in Tennessee, that was pretty impressive. Those people frighten me. That's not a normal empathic human response. That's not what normal people say. That's what abnormal people say. And then the last two, if you think about moving on the path from ideas to actions, that ATAP path we talked about, the violent ideation, the grievance, violent ideation, and decision, is this idea of hunters versus howlers. And here's the biggest thing I've learned in my career. Most people who want to lash out at somebody don't warn the target directly. I learned that from the Secret Service and the Marshals and the FBI. Before they harm somebody, they don't tell the target directly, except if it's just domestic violence related. The kid that wants to shoot up the school doesn't tell anybody that he wants to kill, but he tells his friends. And this is what's called third-party threats or third-party leakage. If you look at this collection of behaviors here, third-party leakage is what helps us, people like me and the threat assessment team process, stop these perpetrators because they don't tell the target, they tell somebody else. Why they do that is a complex issue, but they do. And the Secret Service and other people who have trained me have said what we need to pay careful attention to is the third-party leakage. The kid that wants to shoot the football coach doesn't tell the football coach because he could get expelled or arrested or kicked out of school, but he tells his friends. The challenge, whether it's a school or healthcare or a private sector business or a public sector business, is to get our employees to have the courage with a capital C to come tell us. Come tell the safety and security stakeholders. Come tell your boss. Come tell HR. Come tell security if it's a function. Come tell risk management or the PIO or elected officials if you have them, or attorneys or board members or CEOs or CAOs. If you have that function where you've created a culture where people say this is wrong, it's dangerous, I need to tell somebody about it because, and you know this to be true, these things usually get reported to us after the event is over with, in which case it's too late. So these aren't predictors of the future. We can't predict violence, but what they tell us is if we see the evidence of some of these things, plus this third-party threat piece, this leakage piece, it's of significant concern. And the good news about the threat assessment team process is you don't have to be a predictor of the future. You just have to use your expertise, whether it's human resources or security or IT or facilities or locks and gates and alarms or legal or HR. These people brought together in a group environment can come up with potential solutions for these situations when it comes to their attention, which is we're asking employees to tell us. And we also want to create a reporting process with our employees where they know that they have to come tell us about restraining orders or that they hear threats of violence. It's not an option for them to say, well, I didn't think it was that big of a deal. We want to know about these things so we can address them. We've seen some, especially public sector organizations and schools and larger private sector organizations will hire social media monitoring firms that will say anytime, hashtag, Main Street School shows up, we want to know about it. I think that's very effective as well, especially for this third-party leakage piece. Sometimes these perpetrators will post disturbing things prior to doing these events, and we can interrupt the opportunity once we know. So let's switch tracks for a couple seconds here. This Run, Hide, Fight video done by the City of Houston, Texas, and Department of Homeland Security is fine. I've shown it 763 times. It's fine. The bad guy looks like Vin Diesel. He walks around shooting people with a shotgun. It's fake, but it's disturbing. If you want to drag the cursor 90 seconds forward on the YouTube video, you can skip all that, but it still has the same approach. Run out of the building, taking as many people as possible, hide out inside the building with as many people as possible, and fight back. Some people use other language like evacuate, shelter in place, protect. I'm cool with that. If you have seen it in the school environment, the K-12 usually uses a concept called ALICE, which I can't remember all what the ALICE stands for. I'm a bearer of small brain. I can use Run, Hide, Fight. The video that I prefer is this animated version. It's not like SpongeBob, but it's still animated. It works very well, I think, for the Cal State University system. This video is about 8 minutes long. You can see it on YouTube. It's not protected by anything. You can download it on YouTube and watch it. I typically ask my clients in terms of ongoing training just to watch this once a year. You don't have to bring me in to do it, but watch this once a year and talk about it as a staff. Watch this once a year and go, everybody know what we expect you to do. Everybody know where you're expected to go. We don't designate safe rooms in our organizations because sometimes the perpetrator works there. We say go to any safe place that you can lock and barricade or evacuate the facility and then be ready to fight back. So I think this is effective for students, and also younger employees seem to resonate with it. I think it works for kids 14, 15 and above in your home as well. For what you might do if they're out at the movies or at a mall or something like that. I think these videos work. This one is better, I think, than the run, hide, fight one done by the feds. So we look at the language, again, run or evacuate, hide or barricade, or shelter in place or protect, right, as language that you can use. We talked about cover, which stops bullets. Concealment hides people. We'd like both. Cover stops bullets. Concealment is simply stuff that keeps the perpetrator from finding you. And then the last one, of course, is what I would prefer in my perfect world if we could get it, which is this 15-minute drill that we do once a year. Think about where you are in the part of the country where you do some kind of drill. For us, it's tornadoes, and for my daughter in Florida, it's hurricanes, and for my California folks, it's earthquakes and fires, right? Think about this 15-minute drill as a way to say once a year, without fake blood or SWAT teams or scaring people or no surprises. Everybody knows it's going to happen. We do a drill where we ask the employees to leave carefully and swiftly and safely and be out of the business for 15 minutes away from the building, even far, far away. In a real life situation, even a quarter mile might be too close because of how bullets travel. And the second one is to hide out inside our offices, break room, restroom, conference room, supervisor's office, training room, someplace we can barricade and lock the door with no windows, that we can keep people away from that fatal funnel, the doorway, and then until the drill is over. That's what real life would be like in the perfect world, 15-minute drill. So just to wrap up, we do these things to remind employees that these things are rare but possible. We do these drills to remind employees that we have a plan, a place to go to, what's the safest place to be, and not to freeze or panic and know how to act. And that we have a movement towards, hopefully in your organization, towards policies and procedures around workplace violence. You can get lots of boilerplates that exist that are really good that you can fine tune and add to. I have one in the book that I did. It's called Stay Safe at Work. It's on Amazon. You can copy straight from that policy if you need to. The second thing is that safe rooms are not a perfect solution. Being out of the building safely, far, far away from the perpetrator is probably the first choice, and then barricading is the second choice, and then fighting back, of course, is the third. Look at that centerpiece, code words and paging notifications. If you have the type of building with a capability for PA, you can put out code words like, there's an event in the reception area, or there's an unusual event in the reception area. There's an unusual event on the third floor. That means don't go there, right? We use hospital drills, sometimes have code blue, code pink, code red, code silver, things like that. Code silver means person with a weapon. You can do code words, right? That says, paging Dr. Arnold is in Schwarzenegger, which means go to a safe place if you hear that. There's lots of ways that you can notify staff. We see software that does mass notifications of employees, mass notifications, Eventbrite, things like that, mass notifications of students and parents, mass notifications of every employee to stay away from the facility if they're outside it, or to evacuate or shelter in place. And again, the police response is going to be aggressive. They won't be able to provide first aid or evacuate people until it's safe to do so. So we may have to do that. That's why we think about the value of tourniquets and this Stop the Bleed or bleeding.org, bleedingcontrol.org type of training programs to remind people of the rare possibility, how we do these things in terms of the tourniquets can save some lives. So when we think about the active shooter approach, it's to do two things. It's to keep people alive, but the main function is to keep people out of the harm's way of the attacker, and to keep people out of the way of the responding cops, paramedics, and firefighters. What we do is isolate this person inside the hallways and in the building where the cops know where this person is. We've given them key cards so they can get inside. And again, fighting back is a personal choice. If we look at that situation and say, do you want to be involved in your own safety and security? Then you need to take steps to do that. I want the police to do their job, but sometimes the police don't get there until bad things have happened. We have to take care of ourselves. Last couple things here before we start to wrap up. We don't assign designated safe rooms because the perpetrator may be an ex-employee or a current employee. We don't also stage outside. That's an old school thing. We used to stage by the flagpole or go over meet by the dumpster in the parking lot. We don't do that. We ask employees to scatter and then to come back when it's safe, or we will notify them when it's safe to come back. Again, domestic violence is a big concern for these issues. We want people to pay attention to those concerns where employees may have fears about revealing a domestic violence situation, but we want to get them to have the courage to report so we can address it. And again, cover stops bullets, concealment hides you. So left-hand side, best possible safe room. Right-hand side, not so good. Healthcare is tough in safe rooms because they don't lock their patient doors or hospital room doors or exam room doors. Public and private sector, we got a little bit more control over that. Also, healthcare people don't abandon their patients. They don't evacuate with, but leave them by themselves. They typically protect and stay sheltering in place. So you can see the left-hand side, possibilities. Right-hand side, not so good. Left-hand side, better. Right-hand side, best you can do. Okay, last reality check here, and then I'll take any questions that we have. These events are catastrophic and rare. They typically involve one perpetrator. It's only been 5 cases in the last 30 years that have had 2 perpetrators or more. It's typically one person, typically a male. Doesn't mean women don't do this, but it's quite rare. So we want to look for that sort of lone wolf person, ex-employee, current employee, student, patient, somebody who provided services to. We can't predict violence, but we can look at these pre-attack behaviors, which again aren't profiles, but that are part of this third-party threats or this third-party leakage, which is this person tells somebody what they're going to do, not the targets, right? And if you want proof of that, think back about John Hinckley, who shot President Reagan back in the 80s. Reagan had no warning by this guy, no mean letters, no phone calls to the White House, but he did tell the actress Jodie Foster, John Hinckley did, 3 times he called her at Yale and said, "I'm going to shoot the president for you." Perfect example of third-party leakage. We want employees to have the courage to come forward and tell us about these things instead of waiting for these events to happen. So employee and management vigilance, as it says at the bottom, rapid but measured responses, especially from a threat assessment team, a response, which is HR and security and IT and facilities and public corporate communications or public information officer with HR, with our corporate leaders or our public sector leaders. And then training plans and drills, including the 15-minute once a year evacuation drill, a run, hide, fight drill where we focus on the run and the hide. Last thing here, schedule the video once a year as a staff meeting, show it at home, age appropriate, make sure staff knows how to dial 911. If they dial 911, they're going to get typically the highway patrol or the state police. Remind staff to trust their intuition to report, not to stage, and to train themselves to good descriptions. Have your clinical resources at least available, whether it's clergy or American Psychological Association chapters or county social workers or volunteers that are trained in this area. And then again, get the law enforcement perspective in your community. If it's a small community, you may talk to your sheriffs and PD about this, and then think about the 15-minute drill. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions for anybody, and Amanda, back over to you.
Thank you. We actually only have about 2 questions. So we have one that you had mentioned a website, I believe, ataponline.com. Is that what you had suggested?
atapworldwide.org. So atapworldwide.org. So ATAP's a worldwide organization, atapworldwide.org. So if you put Association of Threat Assessment Professionals or ATAP, workplace violence or school violence, it'll pop up and you can see where we are located. There's chapters all around the United States.
Perfect. And then we had another question come in that said they wanted an example of social media listening service. What is it like to hire one and get real help from it?
Yeah, I don't know some specific providers, but schools have used this a lot, and so do public sector organizations, and certainly large organizations, Fortune 500s use it, where they say, look, anytime, monitor our Twitter, monitor Facebook, monitor everything else, TikTok, et cetera. Anytime our hashtag shows up negatively, or positive, we want to know about it. We get a report, and the ones that I have seen for schools will provide a report that have helped really foreshadow some threatening events and some possibilities where we can intervene once these kids start to post this stuff. But I think it's a good insurance policy, especially if your organization has some large public face that people know about, and they're posting hashtags about your organization. I think it's good insurance.
Okay, and then the last question that we have is, do you have a recommendation for first aid kits?
If you look at sometimes your facilities people will be able to provide good information. If you look at the stuff that's online, Amazon sells a lot of good full service first aid kits. I would put as many tourniquets as you can stuff into your AED machines if you have those at your property or on your campus. I think that's really what we're focusing on, is bleeding control.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's all we have. So thank you for attending today's webinar presented by Heffernan. We will be sending information by email with instructions on how to access a copy of the presentation on our website. Thank you, Dr. Albrecht, for your time and expertise today. We hope all the attendees found today's webinar to be a valuable use of time. Be sure to join us on June 6th for our Stress Management Real Tools for Work and Life Balance webinar. Thank you and have a safe day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.